Okay, so over to you, Malcolm. Do you want to introduce the session for us?
Yeah. So, welcome everybody, and thanks for sparing time today. This is the second one of our Elevenses. So, something we started obviously during this lockdown period, and something we're obviously planning to continue for the coming weeks. So, welcome aboard, and thanks for sparing the time. So, quickly. Do a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll talk a little bit just about Anne before we jump on to Kelly and what concoction she's got lined up with fruit bowls. I'm Malcolm Seagrave. So I was part of the leadership team at Anne. So I was brought in a couple of years ago to help establish us in the north. So we are around about 700 or so people across the UK at the moment. So sites in several sites in London. We opened up recently in Thames Valley in Reading, opened recently in Edinburgh as well, and we've got clubs established across Manchester, Leeds and Halifax. We've got a global consulting team that supports those clubs, and also we're about to spin out a cloud business at the back of the growth in that space. So growing at a ridiculous pace. So only been going 5 years now. And we've really big ambitions for the next 5 years in terms of taking Anne globally, with Amsterdam likely being our first port of call in Europe. But we're looking to create around about 70 offices globally by 2025. So, I'm sure you're going to see more and more of us over the coming period. So if you pop onto the next slide, Kelly. So just a little quick introduction on what we do. We in essence do two things that are slightly different from your traditional consultancy business. We still do the traditional building of digital products, but we come at it from a slightly different angle, in that we firmly believe that every business should be doing this themselves. So we build it from a foundation of building their capability. So we've a load of support functions around coaching, which Kelly is naturally one of, the academy and training facilities that we put alongside the teams that we put on site. So it's all part of our proposition to help build and develop the capability of our clients, right away from helping them hire the right people to reskilling the individuals that are there, or upskilling the teams that are within place as well. The best way to learn is to work alongside us, and when we can intervene at the right point then. So a big part around building digital capability, and that's partly why we've grown at the pace we've had, because when we do this right, we help our clients build their digital capability, in essence, build their businesses. We often see, quite a increase in the digital teams at clients as this starts to, seed itself across the business. So it's a slightly different model, but we build digital products, and we build with an eye on building digital capability. So, a big part of what we're about. Pop onto the next slide. And we tend to do this through what in essence are three areas. The bulk of our business is building stuff, and that's where the clubs come into, the local sites, so Halifax, York, Leeds, Reading, etc. So building those digital products. So we've every digital skill you can imagine in the mix in that space. They're massively supported by the teach part of the equation, which is that capability build. But also we've got this global consulting team that I talked about, which is often helping up front deal with some of those bigger issues and help set this up right, in terms of guiding the clients. So working typically at CXO level to really shape that. So all the way from ways of working, organisation design, really getting product space set up, all those good areas that enable us to then, get the things set up right foundation-wise, to then go in and build stuff properly with the clients and upskill those teams. So something that works really, really well for us, and as I said, it's partly why we've grown at the pace we've had, because clients tend to stick with us, but also tend to take them with us when they move on. So the network effect has been quite significant in terms of how we've grown. So I think that's the last slide from me, I believe. Just check, Kelly, I think it is.
Yep. It is.
So over to you, and I'll noting questions through chat, so feel free to add things in, and we'll do a big Q&A at the end as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Malcolm. So as Malcolm said, I'm Kelly. I'm an Agile Coach, coaching one of the clubs based in London. And that involves coaching agile ways of working, the processes and practices, but also the mindset and the team culture that comes with that. And I've been working in software development for about 9 years now, across analyst, scrum master, and various coaching roles. So let's get into it. In this Elevenses series, we are exploring how play and games at work can really help us. And so today's session, as you know, is exploring the challenges that agile teams face when estimating their work, and especially how that gets impacted when they're estimating work remotely, and how a simple game and an everyday analogy can help you to overcome those. So you had a great idea for your product, and it's on the horizon, it's just forming in your mind, but what do you do with it? Before you go ahead, I guess, to start fleshing it out and adding it to your product backlog, the product manager or sponsor or anyone serving your team, they'll probably come to you with a couple of questions. You know, how big is the effort? How long is it going to take? How valuable is this idea to our business and our customers? How complex is it compared to everything that you're already working on? And where does it sit in the priorities? And if it is priority, when could we get it to customers so that we can start getting feedback? And when do you think we could get marketing involved, and who would need to be involved to make it happen? So standard product management questions for many. And you know, how could your team respond? This is one common scenario where at the beginning of an idea, agile teams need to do some form of high-level estimation as these new ideas come up. But when else and why else do agile teams estimate? So on a regular basis, agile teams have to answer some of these questions that you can see. So how many of our goals can we reach in the next fortnight, for example? Or which pieces of our products can we get out to our customers this fortnight so that they can use it and give us feedback? And so the second main regular reason that agile teams need to estimate is to basically chunk up a big project or a product idea into smaller chunks so that they're delivering them regularly. And if you're doing Scrum or some form of scaled agile, then they need to be able to figure out on a regular basis approximately how much work can be fit into a particular time frame. So let's call it 2 weeks for the sake of today, because that's a really common time frame, and that's known as a sprint. So how much work can we fit into one of our sprints? So picture a bucket of water. Essentially, the bucket is your time frame of 2 weeks. The team needs to guess roughly how much water they can fit into that bucket, because we don't want to spill it over and cause a huge mess. But equally, it's no good to us if it's half full and we've wasted some capacity. But water is something we're all pretty familiar with, right? So it won't be that tricky after a while to start estimating how much we can fit in the bucket. But suppose that we need to fill the bucket with various different fruits. And these mixed fruits, they vary from week to week. So it's not consistent. How many of those mixed fruits can we fit into the bucket? That becomes a little bit trickier to start estimating. And so estimates really need to help the team make sure that it doesn't commit to too much or too little work. And they also help to handle ambiguity and unknowns that are expected to crop up during the development, during the sprint, because that's the nature of software development. So teams need to come up with a decent, solid enough plan for those 2 weeks that they can roughly deliver, and that's based on some form of estimation. So how do they do that? Let's talk about the three main characteristics of the way that agile teams estimate, and I'll just give a brief insight into how that differs from traditional estimation before, and then we'll move into the game that we're going to play today. So the first thing to note, I suppose, is that it's a whole team effort. So you gather the whole team together, you talk about the piece of work, you share your ideas for how you're going to solve that problem, why it's important for the customer, etc. And then you estimate together as a group, sharing all the different perspectives that you have in your team. And so it's really collaborative, and it gives a more realistic estimate because all team perspectives are gathered. And because of that discussion and information sharing, you actually build a better shared understanding within the team of that piece of work. The second thing is that work is estimated relative to each other. So estimate one piece of work, and then that becomes a nice baseline to use to estimate other pieces of work. And so essentially that's just because that's generally a lot quicker. And so this is a move away from, you know, one or two experts estimating on behalf of the whole actual delivery team and doing it once and it taking ages. And the third main characteristic is one of the more confusing ones, and this is the concept they're going to practice today. So the way Agile teams, a lot of Agile teams estimate is using something called story points. And the estimate essentially has to consider different factors that influence delivery. And those different factors include, you know, the time and effort to build something, but also the amount or the volume of work that's involved, and also the complexity of the work that's involved, and also what they know or don't know about the piece of work that they're going to do, and potential risks that they'll find in doing it. And so it's a move away from relying on an estimate purely in days and just doing that once. And the reason is all of these factors, they do actually have a tangible impact on your ability to deliver the piece of work. And so it makes sense for us to include that in our estimate because it's a more solid, more well-rounded estimate. Because work that's more complex, it probably requires more thinking time. It probably requires more trial and error. It might be more mistake prone. It might be more time consuming to test, for example. But it's worth noting that some teams don't use story points, and that's okay, but many do. And because it's a confusing concept for people that are new to Agile, or even if you've got a new member in your team or stakeholders are new to Agile, it's for that reason that we're going to practice it today using our fruit bowl analogy and game. So everyone picture a watermelon in your mind. Imagine washing it, preparing it, and eating some of it. I imagine that most of you have had some first-hand experience of a watermelon. Maybe it's not, you know, a regular one of your 5 a day, but I'm sure most of you have had it, and at least someone in your team would have had it. So now think about estimating the effort to wash, prepare, and eat some of this watermelon. You probably won't eat it, so you have to clarify how much you're going to eat. And now imagine articulating that effort in the form of a story point. So some of the things that you need to consider when estimating it are its volume. So its volume is quite large. How much of it you need to eat? Think about the tools. It needs a big sharp knife. It's quite big, so you have to consider that. Think about how you're going to, do you want to remove the pit in it, or you're not going to bother? And then think about how much do you know about it? How much do you know about chopping up watermelon? How much experience do you have of it? Are you a pro, or is it your first time? So hold your story point value in your mind and then check this out. When estimating in story points for your watermelon, I'm guessing most of you probably pictured something similar to the watermelon on the left. So some small slices or small chunks, but suppose that what I actually had in mind was the watermelon design on the right. And this is a shark design from one of my friend's child's birthday a few years ago. So it's pretty complex, and I doubt that anyone has done this before. If you have, it's really rare. And the risk of making a mistake is quite high. So suppose you start this piece of work. What happens when you make a mistake halfway through? Are you going to have to start again? Do you have to go back to the shop to buy another watermelon? That's assuming that you don't have to wait for paid or wait for the shop to restock them if they've run out. But essentially you have to start again from scratch. So you have to build that in, because that's a real risk with this type of design. So if you have to deliver that design over the design on the left, presuming to a degree that the amount of work, the complexity of the work, how much we know about it, the risks that are involved are all higher, and therefore it deserves a higher story point value in relation to the solution on the left. So that's a glimpse into how this analogy of fruit is going to work today. And I hope it gives you a flavor of how complexity, risks, and knowns can impact your story points and should impact your story points. Analogies I found in coaching are really useful for helping teams to get more comfortable with new concepts. And when I was brand new to Agile, our trainer took us through this activity, and I think it still stands the test of time, and analogies as being my favorite way to build common understanding of how Agile teams estimate. And so consider your kitchen table fruit bowl for a moment. Hopefully there's a range of appetizing fruits. And remember, within the spectrum of fruits, you know, some are way easier to eat than others. Some are messier to eat than others. There's some fruits in the world that we've probably never seen or heard of. And some we won't know much about how to prepare them and how much effort it takes to prepare them. And this is true of the products that we build too. So some are easier, some things we've never done before, some things we have to learn how to do on the go. And so today we're going to practice agile estimation by practicing the effort by practicing the estimation of effort to eat these fruits. So I have set up some fruit bowls in Jamboard. And we're going to play a game to figure out how many story points there are in your fruit bowl. And so using story points, and remember that they're a combination of time, effort, complexity, unknowns, and risks. So using story points, I want you to look at your fruit bowl and estimate the effort to wash, prepare, and eat the fruit. So think about your chosen way of eating it as well. Are you going to peel your kiwi or eat it with a spoon? Do you eat the skin, for example, which I've discovered some people do during this activity? If you're looking at grapes or watermelon, how much of it are you going to eat? Are you estimating one grape or the whole bunch of grapes? The story point values that you can use are from the Fibonacci sequence, a modified Fibonacci sequence. So you can use 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 20. And what I want you to do when you put into your teams is find the smallest fruit in terms of effort and use that as your baseline. So make that your one story point fruit and then use that as your baseline to estimate everything else. So in terms of logistics, you're going to be assigned randomly to a breakout room. When you do get assigned, pay attention to the pop-up message that comes on your screen because it's going to tell you which number of breakout room you're going to go to. And so that number is also going to be the Jamboard frame or slide that you record your answers on, and that's the fruit bowl that you're going to use. So if I just quickly show you, here's the I guess the fruit bowl, and here's how you move between the frames at the top. And here's the pen, so you can write your story point values on here. The link to the Jamboard is in the chat, but I'm just aware that some people joined after I've posted it, so you might not be able to link it. Let me just copy and paste that again. And then everyone can access the Jamboard. Just check that you've got access. Here's the link in the chat now. You're going to have 10 minutes to estimate as many fruits as you can, and then we'll come back to the main room. You'll come back automatically. There's a range of fruits in there, some that you might not know. There's a mangosteen in there, there's a durian, there's a dragon fruit. So maybe think about how you might handle ones that you don't have first-hand experience of. Has everybody clicked on the link? Are you all in your fruit bowl? Yes? Okay, Jess, if you would like to assign us to breakout rooms, we'll move there for 10 minutes and then we'll come back. So we can have a quick debrief chat about how it all went. If you're not in a quiet place, you can stay on mute and you can post your reflections or questions in the chat if you like. So how did it go? How did you find the activity?
Good. It's always good to see fruits you don't know what to do with.
Yeah. So how did you handle the ones? Which ones did you not know what to do with?
The big one, I think it's a durian, the big thing that looks huge.
Yeah, on the bottom right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was one up on the top that looked like had 3 or 4 different segments inside it.
Oh, the mangosteen.
Mangosteen, right.
Yeah. I also wouldn't know what to do with that. Yeah. So
Our rationale was if we didn't know what they were, then they went to the top of the pile, really.
Okay. So you gave them a larger number.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What was, out of interest, what was your smallest and your largest fruits?
The grape was the smallest.
The grape?
I think we lumped raspberries along with them, as in you can pick them and eat them. And that's as complicated as it gets. Mm-hmm. And then that one that you mentioned, the mango something,
Yeah, mangosteen. Yeah.
The Dorian, and there was another one, the bottom right, I think, that we didn't really know what it was either.
Yeah. So the bottom right was the durian, the bottom left was the jackfruit.
Right.
And the jackfruit is absolutely massive. So in terms of volume of work, that's a lot of work to do.
Right.
How did everyone else, did other groups choose similar sorts of one story points and then the larger ones?
Yeah, so
use the same fruit?
we actually refused to estimate the ones that we didn't know, so we left
Okay.
it as a question mark,
Mm-hmm.
rather than take.
So what would you do? What would you do in that scenario then? If it was real work, how would you handle that?
We'd probably do the bits that we could do first, and then have some extra sort of discovery sessions around, like, what is the spiky thing and what's the stuff coming out of it and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. We also had, I was in the same group as Adam, we also had some quite intense debates about how you eat a kiwi and how you eat some other fruit, because there was really varying degrees of simplicity to difficulty with the same piece of fruit. So that made it made it really difficult for everyone to say, well, actually that's a 3, well, I eat that with a spoon, so it would increase the difficulty level.
Yeah.
We had a short but similar debate about grapes, whether you can just pick and eat or whether you need to wash them.
Yeah.
Because if you need to wash them, it becomes that little bit more complicated.
Yeah. And how did you agree? Like, how did you get the consensus?
I think we just, so we decided on the grape front to document our assumption that we were going to wash them.
Yeah. Cool.
And then if that assumption turns out not to be true, then we would adjust.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think any of us were at risk of falling out either. So there was a little bit of, that's how you eat it, that's fine, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. But in terms of work, that, you know, there's very different ways of I guess, eating the fruit, aren't there? So it just shows you, I think it's a really powerful analogy for showing how to clarify the assumptions and think about, you know, what did you have in your head about how we were going to tackle this scope, and what did you include, what did you not include, what did you think about, what did you not think about? So that discussion piece is really valuable in the estimation. So I'm just aware of the time. I just wanted to really briefly touch on, okay, how does this get a little bit harder now that you're remote? So just some of my thoughts here around why it's a bit more challenging. I think it's challenging at the best of times anyway, because it's not an exact science. It's very much an art. You're just roughly trying to figure out how much you can fit in. And so because it's got that level, it's not got that level of precision and exactitude, that makes it a little bit more challenging, I think. Especially for new teams or new team members or new organizations new to Agile. And now that everyone's remote, I just think that this like collaborative debate and collaborative problem solving is a little bit trickier, especially for new teams, because it takes trust, it takes patience, and you have a lot fewer nonverbal clues on camera to help you resolve it. But for those teams that have been working together for a long time and are habits, then obviously it's a little easier. So I've got some top tips here, which we don't have time to go through all of them. And frankly, it'd be boring if I just read them all out. So we'll send them to you afterwards, along with the recording. And you can always get in touch and let me know if you've got any questions. But just a couple of tips to highlight, I think, in terms of before the session. Make sure, it sounds obvious, but teams forget all the time, make sure that all of your team members are aware of what your 1 point baseline is. What is that one story point that we're comparing against? Whether it's the group, the grape or the banana, it doesn't really matter, but they need to know that as a baseline. And come prepared. Again, super obvious, but we're all spending loads of time on video calls. The more preparation you can do in terms of familiarizing yourselves with the user stories prior to the session, you know, think about potential questions that you're going to ask, think about the assumptions and the potential solution ideas that you're going to discuss in your team. It'll help to speed it up. During the estimation session, remember Hofstadter's law, which is it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account the law. Make sure your conversation is quite structured, and make notes of the details that you've shared and the assumptions that you've discussed, as some of you did today. So read the story, focus on the customer problem, share the details that you know about it so far, ask people if they understand the scope of the story, and then vote. So make it quite structured. And remember that it doesn't need to be exact. You need to remember the analogy of filling a bucket with water or with fruits. If it's somewhere in between buckets, remember you can't squeeze more water into that smaller bucket. You have to go up to the bigger bucket. And then lastly, I think after estimation, don't forget that this is not set in stone. You can re-estimate regularly. So Agile teams learn by doing. So every story that you deliver is going to give you more learnings about how to deliver the next one. And so you can refactor that back into your estimates. And feel free to use ranges and confidence levels and again, provide those assumptions. So like I said, I'll share all of these and we've just got a few minutes to go through some questions.
Yeah, Kelly, so I'll pick up a couple on group chat. So
yeah.
First one was from our man in Ebden Bridge, David. How many cycles of estimation do clients typically allow? And how much do you think is reasonable?
So I think that the more regular you do it, the better in general. As you learn something new, I think you should refactor that in. But you might have learned something new that would actually speed up future work, or you might have learned something new that might make future work more complex or more slow to deliver. So either way, there's benefits of re-estimating. And the benefit for the client is that ultimately then you're getting a more reasonable view on what you actually can fit, how much work you can fit into each bucket. So I'd say whenever you learn something new, re-estimate. Doesn't need to be super time consuming. It's not designed to be. Just do the one story that it's applicable to, if you like.
Yeah, brilliant. Dave's got a good tip for mangoes as well. Pint glasses, you've got to Google mango and pint glasses.
Okay.
That's a task for later.
Okay.
Next one, handling disagreement remotely is tricky, especially where there are hierarchies or language barriers. Often you only pick up discomfort by recognising body language. Oh, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Yeah. So what you could do is ask everyone to write up post-it notes. So on the Jamboard, for example, you could have asked people to document what they were considering when they made that, when they guessed at that story point value. So that's a really easy, safe, anonymous way for people to share their thoughts on what they were including or not including. And then you can pick up, okay, well, I didn't think that was in scope, or I assumed we were using a spoon or not. And that makes it a bit easier. So I'd say try that first.
Perfect. Any other questions anyone wants to shout out?
I've got one, if that's okay. Just a quick one. Kelly, are there any alternatives to estimating in story points?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of teams start with story points, but other teams use t-shirt sizes, for example, you know, like XS, S, M, large. Again, they're relative to each other. So it's roughly the same concept, but just a different analogy. And some teams actually count the number of stories that they on average deliver per sprint. So on average deliver 10 stories per 2 weeks. And they just make sure that their stories are roughly the same size. And then they will plan based on number of stories rather than number of story points. And there's a movement where people are not estimating at all. So it very much depends on your context and what works for you. But if you're not sure, then get in touch and I can help.
Cool. Good tip there from Adam, Planet Poker. Have a little gander at that tool. Question from Alex. How would you handle a new client asking for additional features midway through a project? Would you estimate sooner rather than later?
Yes, I think so, but include what you know about it. So remember that high-level requirements will give high-level vague estimates. So what you can say is, okay, well, based on what we've been doing, this is what we know about it. But let's check in again in a week once we've done a bit of analysis and re-estimate then.
Yeah. Next one's from Richa. We spoke on LinkedIn the other day. Have I got that right? Is it Richa? Risha?
Yeah, that's right.
Remote estimation might get a little time consuming at times. How to manage that? It's always easy to face-to-face discussion, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where the relative comes in, and you need to really remind people with every single story. Remember, against the banana, is it roughly double? Is it roughly half? Is it roughly the same, or is it a little bit more? And if you do that with every single story, it just anchors people in their minds that, okay, yes, I'm just comparing to that, because otherwise it's easy to fall into that trap of estimating it on its own in an absolute sense. And set yourself a time box. Just say, okay, we're going to try to do this in the next 3 minutes. Let's see where we get to.
Yeah. Good question from Himish. Based on your experience, how does this fruit bowl concept work in organisations which are new to Agile?
I think it's really good. For any new teams, I always play it with them because it's quite a new concept, story points, and it's quite tricky to grasp. And teams regularly go back to that comforting estimation in days. So I think it's a really good everyday thing for new teams to grasp. So I'd say it's successful. Yeah, try it and see what you like. You could try it with animals as well, but I think that the fruit analogy goes further than the animal analogy.
Can I add a point?
Yeah.
Sure. One thing that I noticed in my last client was one of the biggest critics of the process of trying to get things done remained a critic for literally years, until eventually he was pulled into an estimating session, in a scoping session, and saw how it worked and realized that it wasn't the science, but actually it was based on as much information as was available, and that was as good as it got. So there was no point, if you weren't in that process, criticizing how long things took. You just had to participate.
Yeah.
And if you don't get those key people in that exercise, there's always going to be somebody on the outside questioning and querying and being a bit of a pain, really.
Yeah, seeing is believing, right? So that's a really great point. And it's good for teams to be as transparent as possible and just set the expectations and say, you know what, we'd like to invite you just to come and get a glimpse into the process and see how we roll.
Good question from Parvinder. Kelly, estimating a large program, say 12 months long, what percentage of contingency would you recommend? Area budgets, all that good stuff.
Oh, it's a challenge, really, isn't it? I suppose you have to base it on how much you know. So remember, one of the influencing factors were the knowns, unknowns, and risks. And the larger they are, and over a long period of time, they're going to be larger. So you have to build in a lot more space to figure out those things. So I'd say if you're doing a large 1 year piece, you need to be checking in regularly and re-estimating based on the new things that you've learned. That's how I'd approach it, and more space rather than less, because it's always going to take longer than what you think it is going to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we do recommend to our clients that let's estimate more regularly based on what we know, but because of the more traditional clients have, their budgeting is still I would say waterfallish. Although build teams are using Agile, it's become challenging. The board would approve funding based on some deliverables, and that's where the challenge around contingency comes in.
I haven't got a one-stop shop in terms of percentage for you, but I think based it on what you've learned with previous. So take the most similar piece of work that you can. Have we got any information that we can use empirically to compare to?
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you.
Cool. Point made by Sadiq. Doesn't everything boil down to time, even if we consider complexity and unknowns?
Well, ultimately, I suppose, but the point is that, remember when I spoke about complexity, is that you need to build in time for thinking, time for more time-consuming testing or more complex testing, time for rework if something goes wrong. When you just focus purely on time, teams tend to go for best case estimates, and they don't think about everything that might potentially need to come in. So thinking about it in terms of complexity as well, it forces us to build in that extra space.
Can I just add something to that, if I may?
Absolutely.
So if you think back to one of the reasons that people started to use story points and think about complexity, if you ask two people, one who's very inexperienced and one who's very experienced, how long will it take to do X, they might give you very different answers. and then you end up in a debate about whether it's 3 days for this person or 8 days for that person. Whereas generally, however experienced you are, you can agree how complex something is and what the unknowns are.
Yeah.
So it's easier to get a quick consensus if you kind of park the "and how long will it take you" question, because everybody's "how long will it take you" will be different based on their own experience level. But you can agree, well, this is more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Good clarification. Thank you.
Cool. I think that's questions done, I think. So really just say thank you, Kelly. Fantastic as ever. Thank you all for sparing the time. Also, a little plug for the next one. We've got one in the diary. It's on Eventbrite for the 28th. That is, did I just say that? Managing difficult conversations. So, please sign up for the next Elevenses, and thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Great session. Thanks, everyone.